If you know your ThinkPad history, you will know the name Karidis. Dr. John Karidis was a gifted mechanical engineer and inventor with 120 issued U.S. patents covering computer design, thermal management, printing, and even surgery. He attended Penn State University's mechanical engineering program, earning his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate from 1976 to 1983. In 28 years with IBM, he earned the title of Emeritus Distinguished Engineer at the IBM T.J. Watson Research Center. To those who worked with him, he was one of the most brilliant and helpful engineers they'd ever met. ThinkPad fans and designers around the world will know him for his work on the famous ThinkPad 701C, which included the TrackWrite keyboard, more famously known as the Butterfly keyboard. Dr. John Karidis passed away on March 5, 2012. Today, with some very special guests, we celebrate him and his achievements.
I'm David Hill. I was the Vice President and Chief Design Officer for Lenovo up until when I retired in 2016. Previous to that, I was the executive responsible for the design of all of IBM's personal computer products, including most notably ThinkPad. So that's since that time, I've been doing a little design consulting and doing occasional video about the history of ThinkPad and some of the unique innovations and kind of behind the scenes stories.
And I'm George Karidis. I'm John's older brother, 4 years older than him. We grew up together, and we both ended up engineers. I've been an engineer with Smith Group, an architectural engineering design firm for over 40 years, and I got to work in buildings, and he got to work in computers.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for sharing that. So there's a couple of questions I was hoping to run through with the two of you this evening, and some of the questions obviously were written for both of you to speak to, and then some, of course, were tailored for each of you individually. First question that I'd like to start off with is for George, and that is, what was it like growing up with your brother John? Were the two of you always very creative, ingenuitive people, or did that kind of come to you over time?
No, I think that was in our blood. We were always tinkering, always making things. Even though he was 4 years younger, I mean, he kind of grew up. I had the opportunity to be a mentor for him, but he quickly caught on. We would always be working in the basement. My dad was an engineer, and we had a basement, and that was our play area. Some kids are into sports or band or camping or something, but we made things, and we would spend our spare time doing that. And it was fairly often that we'd be, like working on the workbench, hacksawing something, and then Mom would say, "Dinner." Then you'd hear, because that's where we wanted to be. That's what we wanted to do. And so it was always that way. And it was interesting. And, we were tinkerers. We took things apart. We put them back together or tried. And that was how we learned. And we were always very curious about how things were made, how they broke. And so basically we learned about physics in the back of a garage. And sometimes that was with accidents, because you learn those very well. I can think of one time my dad had a big vertical drill press, and we were working on something, and all of a sudden it seized, and the drill press started flying around at high speed, and then flung off into to one side in a closet, and it could have really hurt us. And we learned about rotational inertia in that point. And another time, John was climbing the frames of what had been lawn chairs, these aluminum tubes, and he was kind of going up and down. All of a sudden, something pivoted and threw him against a brick retaining wall for our driveway, and then we had to send him to the hospital. And so we learned from those opportunities. We basically learned intuitively what physics was before we ever studied it.
That is absolutely amazing. I do have to ask, is the picture of that brass duck, is that an early work?
Yeah. So we often we made things, and one of the things that was part of our culture was you didn't always have to know what you were making. And that brass duck was actually he was trying to make a caliper with brass that you could measure and things. And then he had an art assignment that was due, and then all of a sudden the brass caliper kind of became that brass duck. And so we would sometimes ask, "What are you making?" And the answer, one of the acceptable answers was, "I don't know yet." And it would evolve, and we'll learn what we're making.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that story. So it was supposed to be a caliper. That's funny.
And it won some art award.
I believe it.
So that prefigures the ThinkPad being in MoMA.
That is fantastic. Now I'm never going to be able to separate the brass duck from that MoMA thing now. It's like, but have you seen his earlier work?
I'm surprised it doesn't fold.
No, and everything didn't have to fold. Well, the lawn chairs did fold. I have to think of that.
Kind of a running joke.
Maybe that was the subconscious inspiration.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. So thank you for starting us off with already some fantastic memories. Turning over to you, David, for just a moment, do you recall the kind of the first time that you met Dr. John Karidis and kind of what your initial impressions were?
Yes, I was still working at IBM, and I was working in Minnesota in the AS400 division on what would be called servers, rack-mounted servers and such. And I went to a corporate design review, which were always interesting because the other divisions would come, show what they were working on. And the Japanese presentation was always a treat because you get to see what was going on with ThinkPad, which was from its onset a star. And they had a guest speaker, Dr. John Karidis, who I'd never met before in my life. And he got up at the front of the room with a big, huge black briefcase, and he pulls out of it this prototype of the ThinkPad 701C and started talking about it. I'm thinking, okay, I don't know, what's the punchline? Because, he pulled out this relatively small computer, and then he opened it, and I could not believe it. I was like, the immediate reaction was, do it again. And that was a reaction that you got, and you still get. Anytime I have shown that product to anyone, I don't care if it was last week or 20 years ago, the reaction is, do it again. And then the next reaction is, can you buy this? Did they make it? Who makes this? Do they still make it? Why not? I mean, nobody can believe it. And he was so humble and obviously a genius, in my opinion, at solving creative engineering problems. He blew me away. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I do think he was a genius, and humble. I think he was on the cover of Business Week and the same summer on the cover of some PC magazine. And
So,
yeah, it was kind of amazing, and it helped bolster IBM's reputation. And
it was very transformational for ThinkPad, because ThinkPad's original innovation was fully featured PC in a svelte black package, full color screen, great keyboard, and a track point. That was it. That was the secret sauce. But when you added into it this scoop of this amazing innovation that looked like it was made by M in the back room for James Bond, it like it completely elevated the brand to an amazing level that people they would kill to get that kind of innovation wrapped around their brand, and it had a halo for decades.
No doubt about it in this call today that, Dr. Karidis was a man of many exceptional talents. And I was just wondering if you wanted to take some turns sharing what it was like to have him as a coworker, because I know, David, you worked with him for many years on many projects. And then, of course, George, what was he like having as a brother? So, David, if I could invite you to kind of continue telling your story about how you worked with him.
So, following the butterfly phenomenon, I became very connected to John, and we would work together on various concepts of how we could transform the user experience of a ThinkPad. So we worked on concepts, for instance, that were optimized for use on an airplane. I, in fact, bought airplane seats so we could test them. We worked on screens that elevated. We worked on the possible reintroduction of butterfly with this amazing design idea he had. There's so many of these things. We worked on small handheld products that looked kind of like a phone, but you could squeeze it, it would pop open. It was like a card trick. I think I may actually have the model somewhere around here. There were so many of these things, and then I would bring him in also to brainstorming sessions with my team. And in fact, sometimes with the engineering team, if we had a problem to be solved. And I don't know, it seemed like the usual answer in these rooms was you'd have like 20 reasons why something couldn't be done or wouldn't work. And John would listen to all this, and the next thing you know, he's at the front of the room at a whiteboard, and he's spitting out idea after idea after idea. His was like, it was the complete opposite of most people's reaction. Instead of the 20 reasons why it wouldn't work, here's 20 reasons or 20 ways we could do it. And if somebody said, well, it's going to be too expensive, he would, on the fly, tell you how to cost reduce it. It was like crazy. And whenever he had an idea, I miss this very much, he was going, ooh, 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 ooh. And then he would run up to the board, grab the marker, and draw this thing. But whenever you heard ooh, ooh, you knew there was a treasure to be seen. Something was going to come out of this that there were going to be patents, there were going to be ideas that shot off of this. I mean, every time I was in a meeting with him, I think I walked out with more patents because we would play off of each other. I don't know, the ooh, ooh thing, one of the most memorable reactions in my brain. It's an imprint of working with John.
Mm-hmm.
It's one I miss greatly.
Yes, yeah. So for me, growing up with John, he was always thinking, and usually, even for a young kid, several steps ahead of wherever things were. And when about the third grade, we started getting, reports from the principal or the teacher saying, he often brings up things where the teacher's wrong. And and so we had to tell him he was right, and he would just have an uncanny way of seeing right through something that wasn't right. We had to kind of learn to maybe tone that down a little bit and not do that all the time. we had some IQ tests done of the three of us kids. We have an older sister, and John's younger. And so my mom kind of acted a little funny about John. She wouldn't tell us what his IQ was, and we never did learn. But we kind of feel that it was probably stunning. My dad was, a kind of a nerd, geek, smart, went to Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon. And my mom was into languages and making things and was a valedictorian. And, so they were smart. But I think John came out with kind of like, double duty. And so he had a capacity to listen and think that was fierce and was thorough and all searching, kind of at the same time. So it was kind of scary. I mean, not when he was 4, but when he got when he got a bit older, it really developed. And for me, being 4 years older, when we went to Penn State together, we were there for 1 year because I was in a 5-year program. And so, he started, and I kind of missed his high school years. He had gotten kind of bored maybe after I had left and, started hanging out at the pool hall. And I'm sure he was very good learning about spin because growing up, we loved to play ping pong, mostly because it was about spin and the physics. That was physics in motion. How do you do that? And so I'm sure he was very good at pool. And so he kind of was bored and maybe strayed a little bit, but in school, I left after the first year and came to Detroit, and he rose like one of the model rockets that we used to make, growing up, and he finished, his bachelor's and then got his PhD in an unheard of 3 years at Penn State, and then his advisor said, well, I was really glad to have John as my first TA, teacher's assistant, and then he realized that after John there wasn't anybody kind of like John. But he not only learned intuitively about physics beforehand, but he learned the book knowledge about math and physics, and he could even apply a differential equation or a Laplace transform, which most engineers don't even touch. They're kind of allergic to it because they made it through in college, but they don't really use it, depending on what field you're in. Anyhow, he was very curious, very bright, and very helpful.
Over my career, he is head and shoulders by far the smartest, most brilliant engineer I've ever been associated with. Ultra creative, think on his feet, do these kind of mathematical calculations in his head. I mean, you'd ask him some crazy question, which to a designer, you'd be like, well, how would you hold that with a spring? And he would calculate in his head while he was talking to you and tell you the spring rate. These are the kind of things I was like, what? How did you do that? He said, well, it's actually very easy. I can show you how. No, it's okay. All right. I don't think I need to know how to do that. He was the most creative engineer I've ever met, by far.
David, I know that you've shared a little bit about kind of your first experience, not only with Dr. Karidis, but also the 701C, because they happened to be at the same time. However, if there's anything that you want to add to that, I'd like to hear George's reaction first to the first time that he first saw the 701C and his implications. And I'm sure there will be some back and forth there as well. So feel free to jump in after.
Well, I have one now. I haven't turned it on lately. I hope it still works. I bought it about a year or two ago, and I turned it on frequently, but I need to turn it on again because I've heard that it might stop turning on. But anyhow, John lived in New York, and my wife and I lived in Detroit. And so we didn't see each other that often, but we'd call and we'd catch up. And when we did see each other, he'd show me all of his neatest, latest ideas. And I remember on the butterfly keyboard, he told me how he told his wife, Lynn, about this idea, and he was all excited. I'm sure it was an ooh idea, and he said, how can we make this? He was thinking to himself, telling me, how can we make this keyboard, fit, open up? And he said, I realized there was an aspect ratio problem. And so he took a Xerox copy of a keyboard, and he took out scissors, and he said, it ought to be something like this. And he cut a pattern like that. And he says, yeah, that would work. And then he goes home and he shows Lynn. And Lynn, who's got a great sense of humor, she looked at him and said, and they pay you to do this? She was really kind of surprised that it was even useful, but I guess it became iconic. And then he had the chops not only to conceive the idea, but to, he was going down to North Carolina with you, David, and working with people to make an ultra thin thing in the substrate, and then the hinge to make it up, and it had to be spring loaded in case somebody pulled on it or pushed on it. And he was just telling me, all the things that it had to be. Of course it did. And so I just got a kick out of that. And Lynn and my wife, Lynn, are also not engineering people, but they tolerate us, and they listen to us explain physics for a while. So.
I love that added story about his wife's reaction. I didn't even know about that. The 701c is certainly the big one, but I'm sure that there were other projects and opportunities that both of you, I presume, had to work with John on. And I was wondering if there was any memorable moments or projects that either of you would like to share. And if we want to start with David this time, and then we can go to you, George.
Sure. I talked a little bit about some of these concepts we worked on for screen elevation. There was one which was called, codenamed Otis, like the elevator company, because the screen would go up or down. And that resulted in, I think, 2 or 3 patents. He and I worked on that, but my role versus his were quite different, but we both contributed to each other, and it was a great working relationship. There was another one which was codenamed Houdini, because ThinkPad is a box, and Houdini was often escaped a box. So we invented this concept where it would open like a normal laptop or a normal ThinkPad, but then you could move the screen forward, and the keyboard would rise into an inclination and elevate the screen. And that we get very close to getting someone to build it, but eventually it was discarded. And we did get permission, however, to enter it in a design award competition, and we got the gold for it, hands down. And we put the trophy on a mantle. That's about as far as we got. There was another very interesting idea he had, which he called cyberphone. And he was very enamored with the concept of being able to use a cell phone, but have a large display. And so he had this idea, I need something to hold my phone. You hold the phone up like this, and he had an idea for a screen that would flip out of it like this in front of your eye. And he made a prototype of this, and you held it in front of your face, and you looked at it, and you thought you were looking at a 10-inch screen. It was unbelievable. I was like, this is crazy. I mean, it didn't look, I thought he was making this up. He pulled it out of his big black bag with all this other stuff. Initially, I thought, okay, he's had a little too much to drink on the airplane coming down here. But then he handed it to me, and it was all mocked up with like a flashlight and a 35 millimeter slide and its optics. You could turn it on. I mean, it'd be like, whoa. But IBM was not interested in being in the cell phone business because they viewed there was no future in such a thing. You could get on the internet with. That was just a dumb idea.
Oh boy.
So For me, I mean, the things we worked on together obviously were a lot earlier on and younger. Uh, One of the things we worked on was so we did model rockets, we did airplanes. They weren't remote control, then you had to swing them around, and then we adapted the rockets to propel cars that raced up the street tied to a little string, but sometimes they would escape the string and fly through the neighborhood. But probably the most memorable thing was we built a wooden frame go-kart with a 2 horsepower Briggs and Stratton Sidewinder engine, and we got that thing to go about 30 miles an hour, and it had an electric brake that shorted out the spark plug, and then we developed a 2-speed transmission. It was like two different ratios of belts side by side, and you had an arm down here. You pulled it up and you slid it over, and then in the back behind you, it would tighten up a different ratio. And we used that for a while until we realized that the drag on the other ratio kind of slowed down our top speed. So we just used the second speed for a while. But decades later, we went to Henry Ford Museum, and we were walking around, and John was saying, "Ooh, ooh, look at that! Look at the way the coils are, and the magnetic flux is doing this." And he would see the evidence of the design intent by what was made. And anyhow, we saw that Henry Ford's quadricycle in the late 1800s had the same 2-speed belt drive idler pulley thing. So we had kind of come up with the same idea that Henry did. And Henry wasn't trained as an engineer, but he was a great engineer. So John got into photography, and he had a 2 1/4 lens, and he got into developing too. So we built a little dark house for him, and he would do a dark room. He would do the chemistry and everything, and I think that's where he probably learned his chops on optics. And I remember him talking to me about the heads-up display. It's much like Magic Leap and all of the things that they're doing now. And he would have loved to be in that space, and probably would have made a significant dent in it had he been able to live longer. But I think that was the experiences that he had, he parlayed into one thing after another at IBM. And speaking of IBM, he was so proud to be part of the cadre of people who actually made machines, because it's international business machines. That's how they started. And this group was very proud to be making machines. And I hope they're still around, and I hope they're still doing some machine making, because that was what John wanted to do. He wanted to make things.
He was really, really good at it. There's another thing that he worked on, or tried to get IBM to work on, which was a watch you could wear with a touch user interface display that would be a small computer. That was also poo-pooed.
Really?
Yeah, this is way before the Apple Watch.
Right.
Way before that.
Yeah.
Very, very forward-thinking person.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
He was like 10 steps ahead of everybody on anything you ever wanted. One of these brainstorming sessions that I tried to have, because we were working on a computer that was be easy to service, and we get lots of pushback on this from the regular team. And so I said I was going to have John Karidis come to the meeting, to sort of fuel brainstorming. One of the people, I won't name any names, said they refused to come because they didn't want to be embarrassed by him.
Oh.
Not that he would try to embarrass somebody.
No, they thought it was a setup. Like, you're bringing in the ringer. Oh, come on. Yeah, they just didn't want to do it. They were like, really? They didn't know what to say.
I found an article from CNET, I think it was published in 2009, where John was being interviewed, and the person was just asking questions pretty much all over the board. But looking back on it now in 2021, you were just thinking, the interviewer would ask a question to John, like, what do you think computers are going to look like at this point? And then there was his response, and I read it, and I'm thinking, okay, that was 4 years ago. That was 2 years ago. They're working on that now. By the time the ink was dry on this, it was probably already done. Like, it was just, I wholeheartedly agree. He was just so far ahead.
Yeah, he was very enamored with touch interface. In fact, I worked with him on a concept which was called Chameleon, and it was a desktop sort of. It was called Chameleon because it transformed at the different user states. It looked kind of like a laptop, or it looked like a tablet, or it looked like a desktop. But the most interesting thing about it, other than all the transformational geometry, which just came naturally for John, what was so interesting about it was he built this prototype, and it had a full touch user interface. And he would demonstrate, you can scroll like this, touch this. And it was well before any real popularity of that kind of technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, the good news is he was at IBM and had the opportunity to do amazing things there. Had he been also in California or something, he could have made some dents in other areas.
Oh, yeah. He was a treasure, no doubt.
The last, I would call, project-related question, anyway, that I had was just an opportunity to make sure that we didn't miss anything, I guess. And that was, are there any other projects that, when you think about John, that kind of come to mind that are iconic for John? Because, really absolutely brilliant guy, and I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything missed earlier on. So I just wanted to open the floor and give both of you the opportunity to speak to anything that you're like, what, John did this and it's amazing. George, if you wouldn't mind, if we could start with you.
Well, the one that I think he was proud of was the high-speed mini positioner, and that was an electrical probe that can move XYZ at 50 Gs accurately, and so it could probe electrical contacts in a chip to test it, and he had some swing technology bearing counterbalanced high Gauss electromagnetic thing. His thing in college was high speed electromagnetics. He started doing some early on. I took him to Cobo Hall, what was called then the Convention Center in Detroit, and he presented to the Society of Automotive Engineers on high speed fuel injection valves. And so he was doing that. And then I think he went to IBM to work on band printers, which is a band that goes around with letters on it at high speed, and something whacks it. It's the precise spot where it needs to imprint that letter. And so he was a whiz at that. But this mini positioner is used as an exemplar in mechanical engineering programs even today, on the counterbalancing and high speed, high accuracy, high positioning. And you can see a video of it. It's just a blur. And I think that was maybe the apex of his electromagnetic aspects. But that was just one of his many strengths.
I think that was codenamed Hummingbird.
Yes. And I don't know if he came up with these code names, or did you have interesting code names for everything?
Yeah, well, we would collaborate on some of them that we were working on, like Houdini was one we worked on. Chameleon, he came up with by himself. Otis, I think we just jokingly talked about it. I don't know. Hummingbird was a perfect name. I saw a video clip that he showed me one time. I'm looking at like, this is, I didn't even know what to say.
Right. I mean, things can be made to accelerate faster than 50 G, but this did it with ultra precision. And the other thing, he was also involved in things like heat sinks and detailed people would come to him and he'd be involved in the heat transfer from the chip to dissipate it to wherever it needs to go. We talked about computer room design and the future of high technology, high density computer rooms because I've had that experience, and he was working at the detailed level. But I think some of his loves, as you say, were the visual display, the high speed electromagnetics, and then almost anything else that would come up.
Some people used to refer to him as a hingineer,
Yeah.
which I always sort of fought back on because he was far more than a one-hit wonder with a hinge.
Right.
So whenever anybody called him like that, I would always say, "Hold on, come on. He's a lot deeper than that." And all you had to do was get in a room with him, and you'd figure it out.
So did he push you to think more creatively and to explore other avenues?
Definitely, absolutely. We had a great working relationship of give and take. We even thought one time about starting a consulting business, and we collaborated on it was going to be called Form Plus Function. And unfortunately, that never came to fruition, but it would have been a great ride.
Right. And I know he has some patents in orthopedic surgery because we have an orthopedic surgeon in the family, and wherever something goes, wherever there's the curiosity, he'll shine he's shown his light on it and made a big difference.
Yeah, we went on a press tour one time together and met with media, New York City and other cities. It was always fun, and he challenged me a lot. I learned a lot from working with him, and I think he learned a lot from me because we both very creative and have different sorts of different approaches or came from different directions, but we were always interested in solving problems. It was a great collaboration. It's like I said, it just was sad when it came to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we learn a lot from the people that we work with and we grow up with, and those that are around us. And what is something, and maybe it's one thing, maybe it's two, that you feel that you have learned from John? So, David, I'll let you continue with that.
Well, I guess it's one thing. That's tough. One thing is I learned that with enough creative horsepower, you can solve almost any problem. And no matter how daunting it may look, if you don't give up and if you get together the right people, because it's always not just one person. If you get the right group of people who are like-minded and can together create a synergistic sort of problem solving, you can do almost anything. And he was a great catalyst for that. And we certainly did that many times with myself and John, and also Richard Saffer. Richard Saffer liked him very much. We would have brainstorming sessions with him, and that was like a 3-ring circus of ooh.
Richard is the official designer for the ThinkPad.
Richard was a very notable industrial designer of historical significance, and he was the original creator of the ThinkPad design ethos, the simple black box with the red dot in the keyboard and all of this. But he was a brilliant designer. Unfortunately, we lost him also just a few years ago. But I think he was 83. That's a lot better. But yeah, the interplay between these different creative people, I think you can do almost anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can't give up, and John would never give up. In no way. I mean, the meeting may have been ending and people saying it can't be done, and you'd walk out and he'd have three more ideas, walking out of the room.
And I think part of that, we learned growing up that just because that idea didn't work doesn't mean you're done.
Right.
And it leads to something else. And what Thomas Edison said, I've discovered 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb or something like that. And you just keep on you keep on going.
Right. But that stick-to-itiveness, the not stopping, the even if the project was over, all the sand had run out of the hourglass, it was still there because there's always next year. They're going to have a next generation of ThinkPad, 12 months from now. We'll pull it back out again. In fact, we'll make it better. Now we know what they don't like about it. We'll fix everything. I'm like, okay, let's go.
So one thing I learned from John early on was that just because you're 4 years older than your kid brother doesn't mean you're any smarter than he is. And in fact, the longer things went on, it became clearer that he was a lot smarter. He also, I learned, John was a man of faith, and he innately saw in the physical world the hand of a creator. He innately understood that creation is designed and made, and that we are made and that we are known. And I think for him, some people today, he thought very highly of Edison, obviously, because Edison has like 12 times the number of patents that John has, and he liked his stick-to-itiveness. But I think he would consider himself and Edison amateurs. We're just trying to do a little bit of what we see in great designs. And some people promote biomimicry, where we imitate nature for solutions. But if we don't, I think John would say that if we don't recognize nature's maker, then he might consider that more biomockery, because it's there for a reason. It's wonderful for a reason. So I think that was insightful. Mostly, though, I learned as an adult that when I grew up, I wanted to be more like John, better at listening, better at collaborating, better at being helpful, and I miss him very much. So, one closing thought: near the time of his, a few years before he died, we went back to Greenfield Village to Henry Ford Museum, and we went through and looked, at one thing after another, and we talked a lot about the principles and the neat ideas that were made, and we reflected on our experiences as engineers in two different fields, but kind of parallel in working with either architects or industrial designers. And I asked him, John, do you know what we were doing all those years ago in the basement when we were tinkering around and really didn't know what we were making? And he said, no. And I said, we were making engineers. And he appreciated that thought, that's kind of the reason, that's kind of the story of how we grew up and how we ended up. And so that's a little taste of the inspiration of being with John Karidis.
How do you think John, if he were with us today, would see some of the current trends that we have in technology? Like it sounds like the idea of augmented reality and virtual reality, you would probably make it better somehow. I don't know, but I just wanted to give you some opportunity to think about what he might think if he were here today. David, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Well, history would indicate that he would be thinking of something that no one else had thought of yet, because he had a rather impressive track record of doing that. It's easy to look backwards and say, oh, touch user interface, oh, a wristwatch that's a computer, augmented display that looks huge in front of my face. Okay, you didn't think of that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago. So I don't know. I mean, he was so forward thinking and had so much knowledge of technology and engineering. Plus, he always wanted to solve human problems. What are the human problems that technology and engineering can bring to bear on this to solve a problem? So I think it depends a lot on what are the problems that we face, and the problems are changing all the time. So I don't really know. I don't know what, but it would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it would be in the human interface. I think it would be in a lot of things that Apple has done, that the heads-up display people are doing, and thinking back at visiting the Henry Ford Museum, in one sense, it was like, oh, it really would have been cool to live back then before all these cool things were invented, because then we could have invented them. But he certainly held his own in today's world, and I think there's an optimism there that going forward there are many other things that can be done, and I think engineers are going to have a big part of that. Incidentally, there is at Penn State there is a scholarship in John's name. If any people are interested in furthering that, he wanted to give back to the engineering society, and also my wife and I are singer-songwriters, and we wrote a song, "Take Time to Thank Engineers," and you can look it up on the PE Engineer, the magazine of the National Society of Professional Engineers. But yay engineers, and yay the designers that we get to work with.
That's beautiful. Now I know what I'm going to go listen to later.
Well, I just wish I could hear him say "ooh ooh" one more time.
Yeah.
It just conjures up so many memories, and all positive, and it's I feel honored to have been connected to it. It was a great ride. I just wish it could have been a lot longer.
Oh, certainly, definitely, and me too. I feel honored. I think the only reason I had a role is because I was 4 years older than he was, and that I could help accelerate his rate of absorption. And be yin for yang, and to bounce ideas back and forth. And I miss that, because he would focus on something so clearly and so deeply that, whether it was engineering or economics or parenting or home care or something, he would just be able to look into something and analyze it deeply and come up with the obvious conclusion. So I miss his wisdom. I miss his generosity and his grace.
Well spoken. This has been very interesting. I'm glad we did this.
Absolutely. I really do appreciate both of you taking the time tonight to share these stories.
This is a toy. What other laptop has a toy?
None.
Like that is literally a toy?
Yes.
Yeah.
I made one. Did you know this?
No, I didn't.
It's like a model car kit. Almost no one has one.
Wow.
It works.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell from the scale. I thought it might be the real thing, but no, it's little.
It's little, see?
Yes. I remember John asking me, George, what do you think the future in aspect ratios of laptops is going to be? And I'm sure that's something that you've studied, but I imagine it's probably going to go, 8.5 by 11 or bigger and be flat. And he says, yeah, I think so too.
Take time, take a little time, take time to thank engineers. Take time to thank engineers for studying hard for years, for seeing clear through physics for you, for making things work a career. Take time to thank engineers for being certified by their peers. The world would be a far more dangerous place without trusted engineers. Take time to thank engineers. They're experts in many spheres. Buildings stand high, airplanes fly. They'll fix infrastructure when the funds appear. Take time to thank engineers, our technology pioneers. The world would be a far more dangerous place without trusted engineers. So take time, take a little time. Take time to thank engineers. Take time to